I need everyone that is watching and listening to bear with me because this is my Michael Jordan flu game. I've gone diarrhea 13 times in the last 36 hours. I've thrown up. I've had the chills. But here I am delivering. I even shorted once, which is absolutely ridiculous because if my bowel movements are this bad, why would I even risk a fart? Anyways, I guess it was habit. But we are back, as always, 6 times a week on the Minnesota Tim podcast. We take off Sundays because that's God's day during the off season. Regular season, we'll take off on Saturday. We'll just switch it. And the news that everyone is talking about is Tua Tagovailoa's comments on Minnesota Vikings defensive coordinator Brian Flores when he was the head coach of Tua Tagovailoa at the Miami Dolphins. And Tua's comments, everyone's seen the video, so I'll just read to you the main quote that he had on the Dan Le Batard show with Stu Gatz. He says, "If you woke up every morning and I told you that you suck at what you did, that you don't belong, that you shouldn't be here, that you haven't earned this, and then someone comes and tells you you're the best fit for this, how you make that you feel?" That's literally what it says on the Twitter account of Dan Le Batard. How does that make you feel? Well, this is the biggest news because most people know the background of Brian Flores. Coached the Miami Dolphins while they were rebuilding. The Dolphins owner told him to tank. He didn't tank. He went 24-25 in 3 seasons with the Dolphins. And then he filed a discriminatory lawsuit against the NFL because he thought he was fired due to race. Now, there's a couple of things that need to be analyzed with this. One, Tua Tagovailoa doesn't go on podcasts very much or shows or whatever and criticize people, which I think adds weight to his comments. Tua didn't just wake up one morning and say, you know what? You know what's going to be good for me? I'm going to rip the crap out of my former coach, Brian Flores. If this was coming from, say, an Antonio Brown or a guy that has completely lost it, a guy that's gone completely AWire, then you kind of look at these comments like, I don't know how factual this is. I don't know how true this is. I don't know how legit these claims are because you're kind of wacko over there. But Tua has a great head on his shoulders. He's smart. He's a man of faith. He went to Alabama and was coached under Nick Saban, who is one of the toughest hard-nosed coaches in college football or ever was. And then he makes these comments about Brian Flores, and people really don't know how to react to it. Well, I guess that's not very true. People are reacting to it all day. They're basically saying, oh, you know, he's being a wuss. You know, you got to be tough. You got to be tough as a quarterback. But then there's the other side of it. It's like, yeah, he's right. You know, there's people, if you're just being told you suck every single day, that's gonna weigh on you. And I take this conversation from this perspective. You need to coach offensive and defensive players differently. Because offensive players, specifically quarterback, it is such a tender position. Meaning, Your confidence fluctuates so much at the quarterback position. One day you're probably feeling great, like you're a top 10 quarterback, and then you go out there and throw 3 picks, and then you probably feel like one of the worst quarterbacks in the league. At the quarterback position, you can get replaced so easily. You are the face of the franchise immediately when you're drafted. There is so much pressure on you to deliver a Super Bowl for a franchise that you're drafted to. And if you are being told that you suck every single day, that you don't belong, that you shouldn't be here, that you haven't earned this, then that's going to hit really, really hard. And Brian Flores, from what I've gotten from him and his coaching, now that he's the Minnesota Vikings defensive coordinator, is he's a no-nonsense guy. He doesn't take crap. He delivers crap. He's a motivating coach. And he is a defensive coordinator. That's what this kind of coaching looks like. A defensive player can take harsher criticism than a quarterback. Because defensive players, they don't need to be massaged. It's not tender. These guys are tough. I think it's much harder to deliver a hit, stand there and let a running back, running 10 to 20 miles per hour, plow you over, and you got to stand there like a defender and take it, than being that offensive player and getting tackled. Defensive players are built different. They need to be coached differently. And Brian Flores' technique with Tua Tagovailoa is an approach that you take with a defensive player. Not that you should tell a defensive player ever that they suck, but it is a motivational technique that he used on an offensive player that should be used for a defensive player. And now that Brian Flores is the Minnesota Vikings defensive coordinator, he had a very successful year 1 with the team. Year 2 should be even better because the defense is much better. All around more talented. It'll be interesting to watch how he can take the Minnesota Vikings defense to another level. Minnesota Vikings head coach Kevin O'Connell was asked about this by ESPN's Kevin Seifert. I would assume at training camp practice. He said, "I don't like to comment on comments of other players on other teams." Of course you don't. But I could just tell you, I know that the players Flo works with, he's got great relationships here. And that's because he's a defensive coordinator. And defensive players need to be coached tough and hard because they play some of the toughest positions in the NFL. I keep on going back to the thought of Tua Tagovailoa said these comments, and not a wacky NFL player that's gone AWOL. That, to me, holds a lot of weight. That, to me, shows me and tells me that there are some truth to these comments. And who knows if this had something to do with the firing of Brian Flores in Miami. Maybe Tua talked to the owner, said, you know what, I'm not being coached the way I want to be coached. I'm being crapped on repeatedly by our head coach, and it's not helping. So maybe that had to do with his firing. Or maybe he just got caught up in the NFL spin cycle where coaches only last, sometimes 1 year, sometimes 2 years, sometimes not even a year. You look at the coach for the Panthers, Frank Reich. You look at Urban Meyer. These guys made it less than a year. You look at Guys that only make it 1 year. I don't know. I'm just kind of randomly talking now. I don't know, but there's coaches that only make it 1 year and then get fired. Coaches get fired and hired and fired and hired all the time. So was Brian Flores' firing due to race? I don't really know. Who knows? But what I do know is coaches get fired all the time. So was it due to race? Maybe. Was it not due to race? Could have been just a part of the cycle. Could have just been a part of head coaches getting fired. Coaches like Dan Quinn take the Falcons to the Super Bowl. They're up 28-3. Somehow they lose that game, and then he's fired like the next year. It's like he literally took your team to the Super Bowl. Or I don't know if he got fired the next year, but he eventually got fired from the Falcons. And then he's a defensive coordinator for the Cowboys. Now he's a head coach again. It's like, that's the way this thing works. So, Brian Flores, I'm happy he's a Minnesota Vikings defensive coordinator because I think he's one of the best defensive coordinators in the league. But his coaching style gears towards defense. He's a defensive-minded guy. And his approach with Tua hurt his feelings. It got to him. And it would get to any of you too. You know, in a regular workplace environment, you would call that workplace harassment. But because it's the NFL, it's in a hard-nosed sport, and it's, got to be tough, blah, 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 it just told as tough coaching. But just an interesting story, and we'll see what Brian Flores has to say in his response, because I think he's due to talk to the media any day here. So that will be fun to watch out for, interesting to watch out for. So keep your eyes out for that.